this.
All right, let me put the link in the Discord.
I will.
Are you gonna go do that?
I'm gonna go do that.
Okay.
Jeez. Oh, we are crushing it. I just have to wait until your thing refreshes.
Listen.
Oh, there we go. I found us.
Cool. Oh, there's 4 people watching.
How did this happen?
Hello. We're very organized. We're very professional. Basically, this is the quality that you would see from the best of Twitch streamers.
I learned everything I know from Twitch. Oh my gosh, my Discord is not working. There
If you're in the chat, let us know how you're doing. If you have any Memorial Day plans, hey Heidi. If you get Monday off as a bank holiday wherever you are, it's funny because sometimes like Memorial Day is a U.S. holiday, but then like other countries sometimes just like have it off too, and they call it like bank holiday. Like I think that's how it is in the UK, but correct me if I'm wrong. And I'm always like, oh, what is a bank holiday? We do not use that term in the U.S.
Which is hilarious because we have
hey Zan,
the Victoria Day long weekend.
Is that what it's called?
Yeah, because it was Queen Victoria's like birthday thing. But we had it like I was off last Monday, not tomorrow.
Oh, okay. Yeah, see, a bank holiday in the UK. Amy, if you don't mind educating an ignorant American in the chat, what do you mean when you say bank holiday? Is it just like a day off? Like, is there a reason?
It's like a stat holiday.
It's just, the day the banks are closed. Okay. Oh, the Lost... Oh, yeah. For some reason, when you said The Lost Queen, Amy, my brain went to The Vanished Queen, which is a different book, and I was like, I haven't read that yet. Yeah, The Lost Queen is so good. I'm planning on reading the sequel soon. It's just a holiday. We have 2 in May and 1 in August. I wish we got just holidays. No reason. Just off.
Like, I think America gets the fewest. Like, I think the UK has more than us, and then Canada gets... We have quite, like, not, I would say, like, a lot, but we have enough.
We get, like... Memorial Day and Labor Day are like the 2 like non-religious days that we tend to get off.
And then you have July 4th.
Yeah, you know what's crazy? I actually get the whole week of 4th of July off. I'm not trying to like do like a brag, but for some reason my company has decided that they want to shut down in the summertime and like give people a week off, and so it's bizarre. I know. It was so out of the blue. So I'm very excited about 4th of July this year.
Do you have a long weekend in August?
No.
Oh, we do.
September, the end of September is Labor Day.
The beginning of September is Labor Day.
No.
Yeah. For us it is.
Okay.
we always get the first, it's like the first weekend of September there's a holiday Monday.
No, it's the last Monday in September is our Labor Day.
But then we also have Thanksgiving in October. So we get that like we have a holiday every day or every month from like, we don't have one in June. That's a lie. And then in July, we have the 1st.
Hey, Ron.
Hey, Ron.
Well, I guess we'll quit boring you guys with our talk about random holidays.
Zan's here. Sorry, I missed that. You delayed your camping trip. I was like, I haven't been camping in like so long.
Switched to going camping today. Oh, tomorrow.
Yeah, I wasn't sure I was going to make it.
Is the weather supposed to be? Oh, okay. Anyway, sorry, my brain is like all over the place. Let's talk about the book. The paper menagerie.
Paper menagerie.
Paper menagerie. This is our short
What happened to us today?
This is our short story collection pick. It has a beautiful cover. I really love this cover.
So pretty.
The like origami tiger. It's absolutely beautiful.
Yeah. So nice.
And this is a short story collection pick. So short story collection isn't really a genre. It's more of a format, but you know, it's something in the spirit of getting us out of, our like reading comfort zone. Yeah. So this Paper Menagerie is like award-winning short story collection. Hello. And Ken Liu is also the acclaimed author of The Grace of Kings and The Veil of Storms, the first 2 books in the Dandelion Dynasty. His 3rd novel in that series is coming out this year called The Veiled Throne. And I had read a few Ken Liu short stories in the past, just kind of as one-offs, and enjoyed them, and thought this would be a good pick. So How do we kind of want to tackle going about this? These are mostly science fiction. I would say there's a lot more science fiction stories in here than there were fantasy. And a lot of them had to do with exploring and reinventing Chinese history and the Chinese's history in the West and those types of cultural conflicts. There was, some diaspora stories. It's hard to figure out. I guess let's overall talk about your feelings towards like the writing style, tone. How did you feel about that with these stories?
So good. Like, I hadn't read Ken Liu before. Like, I'd had Paper Menagerie and Grace of Kings on my shelf for years and years. And I have to admit, like, this was a cover buy. When I first picked this up, I think I knew his name, but like didn't really know anything about it. And I was like, this book is stunning to look at. And it just sat on my shelf. And I'm not a big short story reader as like a format. I find, like, I think most readers do, that short story collections can be fairly uneven. And so I sometimes have a hard time like gravitating towards them because I'm worried that like half the collection I'm going to hate. And I don't know that it's necessarily worth it for the half that I love. But in this case, thank goodness, I was hooked from like the first story. Like I read this in kind of two big chunks, I guess, because I started off super strong at the beginning of the month and I had read almost half the book. And I meant to put all my thoughts in Discord and I didn't. And then I kind of forgot the details. And then I went back to it and raced through the second half again. Like, it was such a great collection. I love his writing. I loved most of the stories. For me, this is honestly the best book that I've read for book club so far.
Interesting. I would say it probably is for me as well. Oh, maybe the Ellis Peters. I might have enjoyed the Ellis Peters a little bit more.
You love the Ellis Peters.
I love the Ellis Peters.
Yeah.
But I really enjoyed this one as well. And I do read quite a bit of short stories. But I have to admit, genre fiction, like science fiction and fantasy short stories, tend to not jive with me very well. But
I'm the opposite.
I do tend to read a lot of them. So I'll oftentimes go on like Uncanny Magazine and a lot of these like genre magazines websites and stuff like that and look for the free stories and read them.
And I never do that.
Like when the Nebula list comes out, I do like to go and read those short stories that are on that list. And what I tend to find about science fiction and fantasy short stories over other genres of short stories is that I think that sometimes they're really hard to do because you're trying to create a whole world, you're trying to create a whole different scientific theory, you're trying to do all of that and accomplish having a moment of character development, a moment of thematic resonance, and that's really all the time you have in a short story for. You do not have time in short stories to have long character arcs or anything like that. You have one, trying to say that's really the shot you have. And so what tends to happen in science fiction and fantasy short stories is that they tend to be much longer. This collection is only 15 stories, which is a pretty standard amount for short story collections, and it is easily twice the length of most short story collections.
Yeah.
And so, because a lot of the stories are like 50, 60 pages, right? And so it's just a little bit different for me when I do read them because I tend to read a lot more like literary or magical realism short stories to then kind of jump into things that are a lot more genre. So I really enjoyed this. I really liked his tone. I really liked his writing style. I did find that there were some short stories where I was just like, this isn't scratching the itch. And for example, the one I really didn't like, and I feel like it could have easily just been cut from the collection, was the very first short story, which was called like The Bookmaking Habits of Other Species or something like that.
Yeah. Select species, but yeah.
Yeah. For me, that was not a short story. Like, it had no character. It had there was, I was saying in short story collections, you don't have time for a character arc. You have time for one character arc, one moment of theme, one kind of point of plot progression. That's really all you have time for. It didn't have that. Like, it was exactly what it kind of said that it was, which was just like, so there were a few of them like that, especially the ones that focus a lot really heavily on the world building details. Like, my brain just kind of like glazed over some of that. And I think the reason for that is that if I'm going to read a science fiction novel that has a lot of those type of world building details and stuff like that, then I will pay attention to that because I know I'm going to be rewarded with a longer story and with like some deeper like emotional stuff. Like, I'm going to get attached emotionally to these characters, ergo I'm willing to put in the work to understand what's going on with this scientific strangeness going on. Whereas here, if it's only 20-30 pages and I'm probably not going to get that. It becomes a lot harder for me to like buy in and like try and parse that out. You know what I'm trying to say?
I do. I mean, I think that the thing for me was that first story was like, it set the tone for me for the rest of the book. I knew what kind of science fiction Ken Liu was going to explore. It felt obvious to me that he writes, this is like it's kind of like Mary Doria Russell with the Sparrow, or there's been a couple of others where I think there's a couple different kinds of sci-fi, and I tend to really enjoy the literary sci-fi side of things. And so for him to come in with a first kind of gathering of these, just like, it's like he almost had a little jot book of like cool species ideas for different aliens, but made it like the language in this first little chunk and the how just unique each species was and whatever, like really set the tone for me. And I was like all in from the first one. And for me, I don't necessarily require that same level of like character development and world building. And I wonder too, like, and I think we've talked about this with other books in the past. I think I read quite a bit of sci-fi, or I consume a lot of sci-fi storytelling. And so for some of these characters, like we could get dropped in on a plot of one of these short stories and meet, 2 or 3 characters. And just based on like a little bit of detail, like my brain automatically just slots those characters into like, I know what this is about. I know who these people are. I can imagine a backstory if I want to, but I kind of don't need to. I just feel like everything that I need about that story, I got from it. Like I never felt that these were short on world building. I didn't think they were short on character development, but I do think my brain just sort of automatically filled in some holes because I think we can agree there's a lot of stories here that have quite a gut punch in terms of the character development. I thought they were pretty much all successful. There were a couple ones that I was less keen on, like personally, but he does this really amazing job that whether the story is 20 pages long or 100 pages long, I care about the characters by the end of it. And I don't think that the constraints of writing in like a short story or novella format really constrained him. I thought he was extremely successful at what he set out to do.
Yeah. I just want to respond to a few things in the chat.
Yeah, I'm trying to read through the chat.
Sorry. So Ron brought up a good point because I was talking about like the length of the stories, and he's right. There are short stories, novelettes, and novellas in this book. I always like kind of wonder like what the distinction is between a novella and a novelette. Like where there's actual like guidelines and stuff like that when you submit things for like awards and stuff like that and places. But
yes, Ron. Sorry, genre shorthand. That's what I'm trying to get at.
Yeah.
Right. There's a certain shorthand. Like I know what kind of characters I'm going to expect if in whatever story. And I think Ken Liu's brilliance in this was like taking those genre shorthands that the reader probably has when they come into the story and instead using his space to make really beautiful sentences, but poignant commentary on that thing that really gives it a literary bent that I love. There were no like sci-fi romps in here. There was no space opera. There was none of that kind of stuff. This was very much like grounded in humanity, and every story felt like an exploration of humanity in some context, which I think for me is what the best sci-fi and fantasy does.
Totally agree. Zan said that he wishes there was more that the leaving Earth and exploring alien stories were more connected. Yeah, I agreed because there was some connections because they talked about the same planet, which was 61 Virginis, I think. And so you knew that they were like going to the same planet. The one story about like that started off that arc between those like ones, if we want to kind of like jump into talking about stories, because that one really resonated with me. It was called The Waves.
Yep.
And it was about the people who were on that exploration mission, and they find out that Earth has come up with like basically immortality technology, and now they have to like make the decision because they don't really have the resources for like everyone to be immortal and to reproduce. You can either like reproduce and die, and your descendants have to die, and for everyone who becomes immortal, somebody has to choose to become not immortal, and like all those decisions that had to be made, and like the family, and then like it got into that weird stuff about when they finally do arrive on the planet and finding out that the people were actually also people who had left Earth and had like colonized hundreds of years before and had like bypassed the ship.
Can I tell you like the most random personal story about this?
Yeah.
I was reading this story and my mind was blown. I was in like this very small writing group like 8 years ago, 7 years ago. I had an outline for a story and I wrote the first, it was going to be like a novel. I'm not a writer. Like this was totally just like a fun project. But this was exactly the plot of my story. Like a group of people who have been on this like cryo ship, who have been asleep for forever, get woken up like kind of unexpectedly with alarms blaring and whatever. And they've arrived at the planet only to discover that other humans are already there because they lapped the ship. Like the technology was better. And so they got there first. And I was reading through the waves and I was like, oh my God, it's my story. Except it's Ken Liu. And of course it's brilliant. It was just like, it was such a funny, like, I couldn't believe it. And I loved it. I thought the waves was such an interesting,
especially when it got to like the mother and son, and the son that had chosen to stay immortal, but then like basically stay in the body and emotional intelligence of a child. Yeah. Like that was horrifying. And the fact that she had to like admit to herself that like her son creeped her out, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
And it like, you do think about it, like those emotions of like mother son, if you extend that across like immortality or like forever, I don't see how you could do it. Like, and maintain that type of relationship, and the way it was captured and just how bizarre and creepy it was really well done. I loved that story. And
I think though, points to like, talking about like the original comment that we had up there about connecting these a little bit more like explicitly and having them separate. There were a few like that kind of run, that those connected stories, and then also the All the Flavors, which was with a super long one set in Idaho City, right? And also the Regular, which was the one about the prostitutes who were using that tech that was embedded in their eye to like kind of have an insurance policy. And then there was a killer that was going around killing them. Like, sign me up for the limited series adaptation of that on some like network with a big budget, because there were some of these that I just felt like I would read 500 pages on that story idea. You know, I felt like I never wanted to leave those stories behind, and they could have easily been standalone novels on their own.
Yeah. I really loved the waves. That was one of my favorites. You brought up all the flavors. Yeah. So that was the longest one. I think that that would be more considered a novella. That story was one of my favorites. Actually, my two favorite stories in this one were the title story, The Paper Menagerie, which we'll talk about, and this one, All the Flavors. And what I loved about All the Flavors was that it was this story of these immigrants come to Idaho City. And, you know, I think I was really braced for there to be a lot of racism. Like the whole time I was reading it, I was really tense. I was like, someone's going to die. Someone's going to get lynched. Like something horrible is going to happen. And there are elements of that in the story, but it was just one of those things where it was like, actually, this is just two groups of people who obviously have some differences between them. And there is some discomfort, but they work through it. You know what I mean? Like, and they work through it in ways I thought were like true to the time period in terms of like how people would react and the vocabulary they would use, but also wholesome, like, and generally positive. And like, I was loving that story. And then it gets to the author's note at the end.
Oh, the author's note killed me.
It killed me. It absolutely killed me, because when I found out that like 28.6% of Idaho City had been Chinese, and that these people, you know, obviously that's not the demographic anymore. I mean, I didn't look up the demographic, but it's probably somewhere around 5%, to be honest.
Yeah.
And to think that like these communities that could have built something prosperous and positive and had this cultural exchange that was really beautiful, you know. And the fact that it was you got to see that glimpse in the story and live that experience in the story, just to find out that the real history of it is that it was ruined by these really structurally racist laws that you know, basically ethnically cleanse these inhabitants because they weren't allowed to reproduce.
And like, it's so devastating.
It was horrible.
I know. And I did the same thing, Chris. Like, I started the story and you get is it the little girl who, you know, is a little bit more curious and whatever. And the whole time I'm like, oh my God, like this is going to go so bad and it's going to be so hard to read. And I kept waiting for the hammer to drop and it didn't really. Like, certainly there were conflicts throughout. Like, that's kind of the point.
I mean, the guy gets accused of murder, but I mean, also it was like, well, he did kill somebody. And so now there has to be a trial about self-defense, but he's ultimately found not guilty.
Right. Like nothing ever like nothing ever snapped in that. And there was that
Exactly.
tension through the whole story, and it never broke. There was a resolution.
Mm-hmm.
There was kind of like a release. But then, yeah, you read that author's note, and like, can you imagine like these people who come and they put like so much effort into a thing, and they're active participants in a community, and they're not allowed to like they just die off because they have no partner. Like it, oh, I hated it.
And the
like,
part too, when like because like the most racist character in that story was the girl's mother, and even she was not like as racist as she could have been, and probably some people were in the 1860s.
Yeah.
But when she expressed concern about like she was worried that they're undercharging for their laundry services, and so now all these widows in the community are going to go out of business. And then the next scene is that guy selling vegetables to give money to the widows.
Right.
It was just so beautiful. Like it was just one of those stories where I was like, that is the most like perfect way to handle this.
Yeah.
And yeah, I just really like, I'm getting a little bit like weepy eyed thinking about it. Like it really got me. And like I just loved the little girl. And like even like there was the point in the conflict about dog meat, and I was really afraid that it was gonna go like really horrible at that point. Like I was like this is gonna like turn into, but it didn't. It didn't. Like obviously you're never going to get people who have that type of attachment to dogs to eat dog meat, right?
Yeah.
But at the same time, it didn't like ruin the relationship. Like people just accepted that this was a difference that they had to live with.
Yeah.
And you can live with it. Yeah,
my dog is staring at me. Jeez.
He heard me say dog meat. He was not pleased. But yeah, it was just a beautiful story, and I just completely adored it. And like that's one I'm going to reread. Like it just totally blew me out of the water. And then I guess we can talk about the title story too, since that's the one that Ken Liu is the most famous for. I'm pretty sure it won.
I think it won all the
award.
Yeah.
I actually listened to a podcast with him recently, where he was being interviewed about that story, and he said he doesn't like it. Well, he said he didn't say it like that, but he said basically
I hate myself.
It's the one where he said that it's the one that gets the most attention and the one that he's most well known for and the most well regarded. And he said it's actually one of his just like fine, mediocre stories. And he said he was surprised that it won all these awards and that people really connected to it the way he did, because he felt like he had done better work. I disagree.
I kind of agree.
I thought it was phenomenal. No, I didn't. I actually read that story like a year or two ago. And so I didn't reread it when I was reading this book. I just kind of skipped it because I'd already read it.
Yeah.
That story blew me out of the water when I read it. When he gets his note from his mother at the end and he finally reads it, I bawled like a baby. Like absolutely bawled. Like it was just such a great use of magical realism. So,
I agree. I think it was I think it was successful. Like I am not, this is not a story that I think was unsuccessful at what it set out to do. I don't think the writing was bad. Like it has so many things going for it. And I think in the context of this collection, for me, it stood out less because there were other stories that had, I think what Ken Liu has done with a lot of these is he's picked a concept, a core concept, and he explores it through character and like human studies, which I find fascinating. And for me, the Paper Menagerie didn't stand out for its core concept. So while I agree that it was, and if you read about like families who immigrate to the West in particular, and the disconnect between the first generation, like the parents who come over, and then the kids that they have that are native to the country, and sort of that real pushback of the kids to just want to fit in. They don't want the food that smells different. They don't care about the traditions of the old country. I think that's such like a common narrative. And I could see, and you read it and you're reading through and you're hearing what this kid is thinking or saying to his mom. And you're just like, your heart breaks for the mother. And that really like strong feeling of regret once he gets that letter and understands what his mother went through and like what she was trying to accomplish. And like the fact that, all he's left with are these, origami, magical realist kind of things, but his mother is gone and that connection is gone. Like all of that, so successful. And I think if like you, I had read this as a standalone story, independent of this collection, I probably I would have liked it. And it's not that I didn't like it. I think for me, it just blends in a little bit with some of the other stories that I also really loved.
I do think it's more typical. Like it was the most diaspora writing of all of the stories in here. I guess in the sense that it was exploring, I guess, well-trod territory. I was just so impressed by it when I read it. And I guess my feelings on it and my memories of the story are not as fresh because I didn't reread it, and I probably should have for this conversation.
But let's peel back the curtain, Chris. When did you finish the book?
This morning.
No, but I think there's something to be said though about that, about a story that you read a couple years ago that has stuck with you this whole time.
Yeah, I still think about it, and I still think about when the kid was he had a friend over, and the little the Menagerie was on the VHS stand, and the kid knocked it over, and just how when you find out like how the magic was working at the end, it just makes all of that so much more devastating. I love that story.
It was good. Like, do not get me wrong. I think so much of this collection was a little bit, well, I guess I shouldn't say all of it, because certainly like all the flavors was not this, but in a collection that the stories that really stand out to me are very hard sci-fi based with hard science behind them. This one being more of a magical realist kind of bent. It just didn't have the same oomph in terms of like that, the idea of the story. It had all the oomph of the character, but I think there were other stories that had really oomphy characters too. I don't know what I'm trying to say, but there were other ones like Literomancer?
Oh, I loved that one.
Me too, but it was brutal, right?
Yeah, and actually, a really brutal story.
There was a comment up higher. Zan was saying, like, waiting for something bad to happen. His willingness to go so violent in some of the stories made the tension in the rest of them higher. I completely agree. Because I felt like this is like when George R. R. Martin kills a main character in book one of a series, and then is like, it sets the precedent for everything else, where nobody is safe, nothing is sacred, like nobody can have nice things, right?
Yeah, and Zan mentioned elsewhere in the chat too, and I was trying to find the comment that story, the all the flavors, was reminiscent of his writing in The Grace of Kings, which makes me very optimistic about The Grace of Kings, which I haven't read yet, but I plan to now.
Yeah, this has got me real jazzed about Ken Liu generally.
So Heidi loved all the flavors, but found agreed with you about the Paper Menagerie. It seems like a lot of people agreed with you about the Paper Menagerie, and I wonder if I had read the Paper Menagerie in the context of all these other stories, if I would have had similar feelings to everybody else.
And likewise, though, like if I had read it out of this collection, if I would have had the same feelings that you had. I think it was just one of those. Oh gosh, Amy. Yeah. So this is the thing. Chris and I talked about this a little bit. Like a perfect short story for me is in like pages. The 20 to 40 page range for me. And this one, I was saying to Chris, like I realized how long All the Flavors was just as I was starting it, and I was like, oh no.
Well, this is the difference between like genre collections and literary short story collections, because typically literary short story collections tend to be, I set out to write a short story collection.
Yep, exactly.
Genre short story collections tend to be, all right, I have published these stories in several various magazines, and now it's time to publish them all in a collection by a publisher and make some money, because typically the short stories, when they're published in things like Uncanny, the magazine Science Fiction and Fantasy, Strange Horizons, all of those kind of genre things, the people who read those magazines are like diehard fans and other writers.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Those are the people who are reading it. And like when the Nebula list comes out and the Hugo list comes out, then maybe some other people might pick up those stories. But it tends to be, it's the diehard fans. And most short stories do not get much recognition until they're published in something like this.
Yeah.
And then the general public kind of picks them up. And so like All the Flavors was originally published as a standalone novella. Yeah. You know what I say, and then it's compiled. So you do tend to find more like the literary side of short story collections, that they tend to be more, what's the word? More uniform, and they tend to be more cohesive collections because of that.
Because they're set out to be that.
Exactly.
And I am the kind of short story reader that, like I said, I would never go out. Like I don't. It's not that I wouldn't. I don't go and look for short stories elsewhere. I wait for bind-ups like this, typically by authors I recognize or collections that are getting a ton of hype. But again, my problem is usually that even the best collections have really up and down. And for me, this was mostly up. Like talking about the ones that didn't work for me.
Oh, by the way,
I'm trying to find.
Not to interrupt, but
No, go ahead.
Davis Tran put in a good comment.
Oh yeah, I wanted to come back to that one.
Regarding the paper menagerie, I think Ken Liu said something along the lines that he didn't like the assumptions readers made about his own family situation. Oh, that's really interesting. I had not heard him say that in interviews, but that I can see how people would do that, and that would be very upsetting about as the author. I hate it. I hate it when people make assumptions about authors based off their work. Like, I mean, there's some things you might be able to extrapolate, but things like that is just ridiculous.
And I think, I mean, not to justify a reader's comment to that effect, but I think you can say that the paper menagerie would maybe was so successful at really understanding that relationship or understanding that tension and creating such effective characters that people just can't believe that it isn't informed by personal experience kind of thing. Yeah. Like I could see that kind of being where that happens, but I agree. Like I think generally everybody's always trying to look for a way to read into something. And sometimes it's not helpful.
Ron brought up a really good point here too. The girl in the Literamancer sets the tension for all the flavors. Completely agree. Because in that story, I was not expecting to shoe the drop in that story the way it does. And like, I mean, I got the feeling that like, obviously the dad was working for some sort of governmental anti-communist agency.
Yep.
But I was still not expecting, and for him to just like admit the brutality to the young girl, I think that was the part that was devastating. I was like, yep, I tortured him and I killed him and I don't care. Like for me, that was definitely, really upsetting. I was really shocked by that one. And I was really shocked by the level of torture that was put to that guy. And the fact that they killed the kid,
kid.
It was just devastating. That was a really devastating story. But the beginning of that story and the way that like the actual like literomancy and magic of the words work, that was so beautiful, especially when they were going through the word thassalocracy. I don't know how to say that word, so I'm probably mispronouncing it.
I think you're close.
And they were like breaking it down, and the guy like makes the word so personal to her and her story of coming to China as this like Texan, cowboy girl. And it was just so beautiful, and like his willingness to like shape that to her and then to like find out like what's actually going to happen because of that word
and I
was
always
just completely devastating.
Yeah, like it's the ones where the kids like don't really know what they're getting involved in, where they don't know enough about a situation to understand things properly. And you're reading along and the whole time you're like, oh no, like there are bigger forces at work here than she's able to comprehend at this point. And like you imagine as a formative experience, and then they just like peace out from, I think it was in Taiwan, and they go back to the US, and I'm just like, ugh.
Yeah.
That one hurt.
So talking about ones that didn't work for you, what one were you going to say didn't work for you? I've got one that really I felt like was bad.
We have the same one. We talked about it, I think, last night very quickly. How do you say that? Simulacrum.
I did not like that story.
No,
at all.
It was one of those things where, like, again, he clearly had an idea about a technology and how it could perhaps be used like broadly, and then how it could go awry, and like created a story about characters around the inventor of that technology. But the tension didn't work for me. Like
I thought the idea of someone, so like we're going to get into some salacious talk here. So I thought basically she ruins her relationship with her father, all because she like basically walked in on him doing the high-tech version of watching porn. Like that was it. And like I was like,
which her mother knew about and like explained to her.
I know. And like didn't like, I was just like, the fact that you would decide to ruin your entire relationship with someone because of this is just a lot. And I never really believed in, like, I didn't believe in her anger or the outrage. And I guess I got to the end of that story. I was like, I don't get what the point of this was. Like, and I couldn't really parse out the themes there. It was just ridiculous. I mean, also like, I feel like I'm gonna be really harsh now. I feel like whatever happens in someone's marriage, if their partner is willing to forgive them, it is literally not your business.
I think it's really hard as a kid to like
especially something
have your
like
illusions
that
about your parents like shattered in that way.
Yeah,
But I don't think that was even what was
maybe I'm harsh.
particularly explored. Like,
no, I don't either.
Yeah, that one was weird to me, and I just didn't care that much about, which is, like, and I think the other thing for me is, again, talking about concepts as like the driving force for what I really stood out for me in this collection. That concept felt like not that groundbreaking. Like, it's Star Trek, it's the holodeck or something on steroids. Like, whatever.
Yeah. The reason for not forgiving, I agree. It was just, that story was just like, I guess, like, because you as someone that's curating this collection, right?
Yeah.
You have Ken Liu's written even more stories than this. I mean, he's published tons and tons and tons. So like, you have the ability to pick and choose there. And so I don't know why the editor of this or the people that curated this decided that was the one they wanted to put in, because I thought it really stood out as like a sore thumb in terms of the quality. Because like, even some of the other stories that didn't work for me, for example, the first book, the bookmaking habits of select species, like, I at least saw the quality of them. I didn't see that in the Simulacrum.
Yeah, I agree. The other one that didn't really work for me super well, or I just didn't care about, was the Litigation Master and the Monkey King, which is the second last.
I kind of like that one.
I just felt like, I don't know if it was just like I was rushing to the end or something, but I just didn't care. Like, that is the one that I will forget existed in this collection.
Really? Yeah. I really liked it. And in fact, I found the torture scene at the end of that story really upsetting. I thought that his willingness to go through all that, to have the story live on through those children,
right,
singing that song, was just really good. And it kind of like brought into the fact that, like, a lot of stuff that you sing as children, like, actually has like really devastating historical implications, like, Ring Around the Rosie, and stuff like that. And I just thought that one was really good. I liked it. And I liked the whole like Monkey King in his head. I think the different,
let's hang on before I get into what I was going to say. Let's go back. There's a couple of comments here. Because Amy, I do want to talk about The Man Who Ended History.
Which comment? I
was just going through because there were a couple. Like Ron's comment about how your memories of person frame them in an untruthful way, and I think Zan said too, like, couldn't take the kid memory robot. Like, that was a like creepy. Ugh.
Wait. What are we talking about? The kid robot?
There's Zan. Okay, so there's Zan's comment that was two above Ron's.
Okay, sorry. Here we go. I'm trying to parse out the chat.
Creeped by the kid memory robot. Couldn't make the connection. I agree.
Yeah. Sorry. Brain. And then
Ron's.
Person frame in an untruthful way. Your memories aren't the person. Yeah. That's interesting. And then Davis right after. Really good. For the Simulacrum, I think the ideal Liu wanted to play with was parents wanting their children to be a certain way, affectionate, and children wanting to keep their parents on a high pedestal.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Father used technology to have a virtual daughter from the period in her life. Yeah, I know that was devastating to me. That part of it was sad.
Which, like, is as bad as, like, especially so in the story, it's not the girl, like, she's not a girl anymore. Oh god, Henry's about to howl. It's like she's being interviewed after the fact, and she's never gotten over this idea that, like, the idea of her father, like, he betrayed that ideal when she was a kid. Like, she's grown up and has never put together that, like, he's a fully formed human being on his own, and, like, has his own interests and preferences and the whatever, and, like, just can't handle it.
I have seen that theme explored better, though.
I agree. It still wasn't super successful for me.
Yeah, it just was not a super successful story. I liked a lot of these a lot better.
2 seconds. I'm going to just mute myself for 1 second and let my dog out because he's going to disrupt everything. Hang on.
Okay. I'm going to kind of... So I will, like, fully admit, I'm going to talk a little bit about The Man Who Ended History because I saw some people chatting about it. Are you there?
I'm here.
Hello. Okay. Hi. I was just going to bring up The Man Who Ended History, so I'm going to, like, fully admit something. I skimmed that story. And the reason I skimmed it is I got to the part where the woman was being raped by the Japanese officers. Oh. And I was like, I don't think I can make it through this.
I know.
And it happened so early on in that story, and I could just tell that it was just going to get worse. And so I skimmed. So that was rough. I think the idea that the story was playing with, in terms of like, here we're going to watch history unfold in real time, right?
Yeah.
And in a lot of ways, given the amount of like technology that we have now, that will be akin to how people 50, 60, 70 years on will judge us, right? Because they will almost be able to watch history back in a way that we cannot, for currently, things that happened
for sure.
in World War II and before. Even, because even when film and technology like that has started to get better, we still didn't have the ability to just film everything. Now all of our lives are being filmed constantly. You know what I'm trying to say? So if you wanted to look back at history in that way, you're going to be able to in 100 years, right? So I found all that very interesting.
I think sort of, though. Hang on. Like, I think there's a lot of stuff that isn't filmed. Like, and I think the point here, so there were a couple things. I have a history degree, and I focused a lot on 20th century history, and I knew nothing about Unit 731. And
I didn't either.
Shows you how useless my fancy history degree was. I think for me, because I did a history degree, and because of so much when you do history at a university level is about interrogating how history is written and how history is interpreted and used, I thought this story was brilliant. Like, I agree. There's brutal parts to read. It's like reading firsthand accounts of any like German concentration camp or British concentration camp in South Africa. Like, it had all of those elements that made me like so queasy, and I struggled so hard to get through those parts. And at the same time, the story was so successful to me because I was so invested in the idea of like, if you could go back and bear witness to a moment in history and like not have things forgotten, but you would have to destroy it, right? Like the cool twist about this story for me was about that particle, and I'm going to forget the two names, but
the like bonds,
like Higgs boson equivalent, right?
Yeah.
But like, I loved the idea that through this like one scientific thing, you had a one shot to go and experience this thing, but then it was lost forever. And it's about the destruction of history, and like, you can make similar, like, there was the one bit from the archaeologist perspective about, they do that thing too, where in order to investigate a site, you have to basically destroy something. And like, I felt the whole discussion around it was so fascinating. And it was, like Amy's saying, like, it was brutal. But I just felt like so much of it was real. Like, the reactions to that, there are still Holocaust deniers. There are still people who feel like, oh, it's blown up out of proportion. It never could have happened like that. Like, everything about that was so awful and completely realistic to me, with that like tiny flare of the sci-fi element, allowing something to happen that currently we can't do. But like, I thought it was brilliantly done. Like, for me, that was the perfect end to the collection. It had such a gut punch to it. It had such like a connection to real history. And it also had that like sci-fi concept that I've been talking about through all of these that really got me. Like, I thought it was brilliant.
Yeah, and it's I thought the one part of the story I thought was really an interesting discussion was the fact that the Japanese were claimed, and I don't know if they were in real life claiming this or just in the story, that they couldn't be held responsible for those atrocities because they were committed by the Empire of Japan, and now they were the Republic of Japan or something. Yeah. I find that really interesting because I'm reading the short story collection, The Hidden Girl, right now, which is Ken Liu's other collection. And there's another story in that which deals with a similar concept, but on a personal level instead of the country level, where if you commit a crime, your like punishment is that your memories are wiped away, and you basically start off as like this clean slate. And then it's like, you didn't commit the crime, and that person is never really like punished with like incarceration or anything because that person no longer exists.
That's so fascinating.
And so, which I thought was like a really interesting concept of justice. And then this is like actually a political and like legal argument that they're constructing, kind of on a similar concept of like, that country doesn't exist anymore, therefore nobody can be held responsible, which is just that, horrible.
Like, you get that interview with the one doctor who was at like Unit 731 and who was performing these experiments, and he's going on about like all the things that they learned and like all the value that they got out of it. And like, How many times have we heard that science and technology is advanced by war? And like, but the whole time I'm like, oh my God.
That's the same thing that Nazi doctors said.
Oh, of course. This is the thing. It's completely horrific. But I think, there's so many elements to that. There's so many layers to that story, like talking about the political consequences or talking about who's responsible and like what obligation does a current government or a current nation have to accept and like validate the truth of the past. Like, everything in that story was pulled from different things that have happened and continue to happen, and he's like stitched it together in this really interesting way.
In the same way that, and there's some like very well respected, and I think just legal arguments that draw on the similar things, like you can't hold a current government responsible for debts that were accrued under a dictatorship, for example.
Right.
So like,
or reparations in the U.S.
Exactly.
for slavery. Like there's. I love the way he was able to take so many of these things, present various sides. And I think we can agree that like some of the sides he presented were absolutely brutal to read. I'm not trying to dismiss and I think that's what makes it so punchy is like the way he's put that story together with little sound bites from other people really kind of show you a spectrum of public opinion that continues to happen around issues like this. I thought it was so good.
Read through these comments. Sorry. Sam brought up, I think by not knowing about the history in the first place took away from the how is the history framed thing. I need the basics first. Yeah, I do want to research that place now. If I know, because they called it the like Asian Auschwitz, which is just horrible.
Well, and I wonder how many like Ken Liu writing in English for like perhaps a more Western audience. Like I wonder how many readers experienced or encountered this for the first time through this story, and then are prompted to learn more.
Well, World War II is in the West, or at least in American and probably Canadian schools as well. It is presented as it is the European theater that you learn about. You almost never learn about the Asian theater.
Yep. Other than Pearl Harbor.
Yeah, and that's literally it. And I think there's so much atrocity about World War II that people don't learn about, and that's definitely one of them. And he says, I think I understand what Lou was trying to do, but it's just not something I enjoyed reading. Which probably isn't a story you're supposed to enjoy. Yeah, I agreed. I found the reading experience of that one a little bit difficult to get into, largely because I was just so focused on the brutality of it and just kind of like, gotta get through this. I think my brain
just shut off. Like, I was so interested in the legal, the political, the like historiography. Like, that was the part that grabbed me more. And like, my brain almost could like shut off and be like, okay, I'm reading a nonfiction text. And like, it is brutal, but I'm not worried about connecting with characters in the same way that I perhaps would have been if it was a novel or something.
Yeah. Ron says that the Japanese do indeed claim that they cannot be held responsible. Sorry. The thing I found interesting, which I suppose should have been obvious, is the idea of the argument Chinese bringing through the Western relations as the arbiter. That's really interesting. And that's like often how things end up being, because the West oftentimes controls international courts.
Well, it was interesting because like the guy, like the main, the guy, like he was the husband, right? He was American, but of Chinese descent. And then we don't really, I mean, I think we kind of realized, but like get confirmation at the end that the wife is of Japanese descent, obviously. And so, but again, it was like, I liked that was investigated too, that there was some American like trooping into China and deciding that they were going to decide what was true and what wasn't true. Like, I mean, sorry, Chris, but like typical America, just like inserting itself and deciding it knows best in a region of the world that is so different from Western like culture, history, social norms, customs, culture. Like I just thought there was so much packed into that story. It was, I think with a lesser writer at the helm, it would have been complete chaos. But for Ken Liu's interpretation was so cohesive in my mind. It was just like, it read more like nonfiction, and I was okay with that. And I get that's not for everybody.
I'm probably going to return to that story when I'm in like a better frame of mind for it, and kind of more able to kind of deal with it.
The Trans-Pacific Tunnel one for some of the same reasons. That it felt so rooted in history and so rooted in, like, it was a thing that, clearly was like made up and whatever. But, there's the callback to the Panama Canal construction, any sort of large, massive works construction project that has happened over the past, say, 200 years.
And I thought it was really funny that like they inserted Herbert Hoover as the guy that was doing all that, and that it was like Herbert Hoover won 4
terms as president.
When really in reality he was like one of the most disliked presidents in the history of the United States.
But I love all that little alt history tweak.
Yeah, I did too.
Like,
I did too.
Little bits.
And I found that story had a really brutal twist as well, with the prisoners who were brought in to do the labor.
Oh, that scene was gut-wrenching when he's like trying to seal off that side tunnel, and like I'm glad it haunts him as a character, and like I'm glad that there was that bit of hope at the end, because I think there's other stories here that deal with like Man Who Ended History, like talking about the order of stories. Trans-Pacific Tunnel perhaps sets up Man Who Ended History, but he's talking about at the end of it, like kind of he's carving those ovals in, like as a remembrance of the people who, like, he doesn't want to be lost to history. He doesn't want that story to be just swept under the rug. Like, I thought that was really cool.
I know. I really liked it. And I liked how it ended with the lights coming on.
Yeah.
And, like it was those secrets were going to see the light of day.
Yeah.
I really liked that.
A hopeful story. Like, despite all the devastation and brutality, it wasn't all...
The last story I want to talk about, since we're running a little short on time, I want to make sure to talk about our next picks, is Good Hunting, which is the fox story. So foxes and fox women are very common folktale motifs in East Asian stories, and I've read a lot of them. So there's, but like, really badly, I've not read many of them told by an Asian author. So like the ones I've read have been the Sarah Hall has a really famous one, and then also Kish Johnson has a really good one. So it was really interesting to see how this one played out, and then took that like science fictional twist. I thought it was a really interesting blend of like magical realism folklore with that science fictional element at the end. And I just loved it. That was one of my favorites.
I was saying to you, Chris and I spent like 2 hours on a chat last night trying to figure out our next book club picks, which we are going to announce shortly. But I was saying to him that I struggled with the first little bit of that story. And I don't know if it was because I was coming off of Perfect Match, which I do want to kind of call out, because that was one of the ones that I had to look up the pub year on that, because it felt really so good. Timely. And then I was like, hang on a second, this was written like almost a decade ago. And so I was just like, my mind was blown even more. But in terms of Good Hunting, like coming off of that super like surveillance state, future of AI, like Siri kind of thing, and then coming into Good Hunting, which is very clearly going to be rooted in a folklore element. It took me a little bit to get into it, but something just clicked partway through, and I was all in on that story. And I love the way that it ended with all of the like, that steampunk kind of rebuilding and like kind of return, like giving something back to this woman. And I loved it. At the end of it, I loved it.
When she showed her like legs that had been amputated and then reconstructed, I was so grossed out and horrified. And then it was like, well, in some ways it is a changeling of another form, like it goes from a changeling of a magical form into the changeling of kind of this technological form. And then it was, going on about how like the magic hadn't been lost, it had been replaced by something different and differently recognizable. I just thought all of that was so interesting and so well done, and a really interesting twist on it. So we're seeing that Good Hunting's getting a lot of love. Zan says he'd rather have it as a novel. I agree. I think it could have been a whole full-length novel and like gotten to really know these characters and really built up the steampunk world. So much of like short stories, you sometimes read and just like, this would be such a great idea for a full-length novel.
And this collection, perhaps more so than others that I've read, because between Good Hunting, the regular, the waves, and subsequent, all the flavors, like I'm looking at like at least 5 novels here. And again, you could do something with Trans-Pacific Tunnel. You could do something with Perfect Match. Well,
don't put your hopes up for getting novels, because Ken Liu is a notoriously slow novel writer.
Yeah, and like that's fine. But it's just like I rarely come across. I think for me, really great short stories pack a huge wallop of a punch, and I'm okay with them being short stories. And in this collection in particular, I just felt like I could take 5 novels out of the ideas that are started here.
Yeah.
So interesting.
Agree. So, success?
super success for me. I mean,
it was very successful. This is like a 4-star read for me. Really,
I think for me too. And I don't know that I've ever given, maybe How to Breathe Underwater is the only short story collection I've given 5 stars to.
Yep, same. Well, I really liked Sour Heart by Jenny Zhang.
And that's the thing. I don't read a lot of them is the other thing. But like, I think, and we talked about this, I think ahead of time too, going into a short story collection, I expect to not love every story. And I think the thing that really got me about this was how even they were for me, with a couple of highs and a couple of like lower lows. But overall, I would say this collection like really did it for me overall. Yeah.
Yeah.
Love it.
Let's talk about our next picks. Ready?
Oh, I didn't bring in my copy. Hang on. We do have to read North and South before we get excited about.
Oh, that's right. Our next.
Four.
I was ready. I'm getting ahead of myself. Thank you for reining me in. So next month is North and South by Mary Gateskill. Gateskill. How do you say her name?
Elizabeth. Is it an Elizabeth?
It is. I was thinking of I got her confused. There's a modern day novelist named Mary Gateskill who wrote The Mayor. Sorry.
North and South. I started reading it last night. Elizabeth Gaskell.
So this is for classics in June. I'm really excited to finally read a classic. So full disclosure, I don't read classics. I lied and cheated my way through school. Shamelessly.
I didn't. We didn't read a lot of classics in high school.
We read a lot of like Shakespeare, and by
we read Shakespeare.
I mean like my classmates read, and I spark notes.
Oh God, I read extra Shakespeare just because I could. I was like,
"Oh, you nerd!"
Oh, I was so I was such a nerd. I like Shakespeare blew my mind in high school and continues to. But anyway, North and South. I will say it is a longer book. Like it is
500 pages in your edition, right?
Yeah, and it's like small font. Now the chapters are real short for those of us who are fans of those short chapters. So I'll put the breakdown for that in the Discord in the next day or two. But it's like 52 chapters or something. So yeah.
Yeah, I'm
excited to read it.
Very excited. And now classics next month. We're gonna get those on. Are we ready to reveal our next picks? I'm trying to do a little drum roll.
Drum roll. I can't. I'm gonna like break something.
Okay, so June is going to be true crime.
Nope.
July
July
is going to be true crime, and we are reading The Third Rainbow Girl by, I forgot to write down that author's name.
I'm surprised I remembered to write down the names of the titles, to be honest.
Third Rainbow Girl, who's that by? Emma Copley Eisenberg. Yeah, so it's about the fact that like in West Virginia, there was a hitchhiking festival known as the Rainbow Gathering, which, by the way, I think still happens. And some girls ended up dying in this town, and there was lots of suspicion. And this is kind of a murder, a double murder that happened that really affected the life of this town forever afterwards, and the population, and the suspicions that were cast on people. So I'm very excited about it. It's definitely kind of like a blend of like genre true crime with maybe more of like a literary bent on its approach and examination of this place. I'm really excited about it. It won a ton of awards last year. It came out in very early 2020. So yeah.
And fair warning that, Chris and I discussed when we were talking about picking a true crime, like what type of true crime, like how bad was it going to get? And neither of us have read the book yet. So clearly there is murder involved. The two victims were, I think, like ages 19 and 26. So they're not children, but I don't know the details of the crime. But just from what we've read about the book, it does seem to have that more literary bent and investigates the community and the effect on the community, I think, as much as the murder and the case itself. It's not like a pulpy true crime book.
Yeah, which I kind of wanted, because I feel like sometimes pulpy true crime can don't get me wrong, I'm very entertained by pulpy true crime, and I'll be the first one to admit that it can be a problematic fave, but it can also bend into the exploitative and gratuitous and voyeuristic.
We're trying to avoid that, but we haven't read it yet. So
August is going to be Women in Translation, which is also not really a genre, but something. August is Women in Translation Month, so we want to participate. And we are going to be focusing or reading The End of Days by Jenny Erpenbeck. Jenny Erpenbeck is a German author. This was translated by Lisa Flanagan. who I think has translated all of Jenny Erpenbeck's books. Jenny Erpenbeck is really award-winning. She wrote the Go, Went, Gone, and Visitation. So I'm very excited to get to this one. This one, I believe, is kind of like multiple timelines and throughout like World War One, and follows.
This is like the Atkinson.
Yeah.
For those of you who have read Life After Life, there's a kind of similar through theme, but yes. Won all the awards. German perspective.
Yeah, got a very similar concept to Life After Life. So I'm really excited about that one.
Me too.
And then for September, we're doing something. Again, we're doing another poll. So this is the one that we've been wanting to do for a while, this genre. And we've just really struggled to pick a good book. And this is just general literary fiction. The reason it's so hard to pick a good book is because general literary fiction is just so... It's like such a non-genre genre, but it also is a genre. Like, if we're being honest, it's really hard to curate. So we're doing...
Go ahead. Sorry, go ahead, Chris. I'll jump in after.
Okay, I was just going to say, we're doing a poll between two books. It's going to go up on the Discord, and you guys can vote the same way we did for the romances with emojis. I'll put that up after the chat. We're going to be voting between The Night Watchmen by Louise Erdrich and The Sympathizer by...
Ton Nguyen.
Thank you. So
both of which are slightly historical at this point now.
Yes.
And I think that's the trouble we have with literary fiction generally, is that it tends to verge on another genre. These are both recent. I think the Erdrich is in like the 1950s, and The Sympathizer is in the 60s, 70s. I'm going to get this wrong.
I believe so.
In the 70s, because it's like Vietnam and whatever. And I'm sure you guys have heard of both of them. And Chris, honestly, Chris and I, each kind of suggested one of these, and we couldn't pick between. We both want to read both, and I don't care between the two. So let the group decide. Especially because perhaps, I'm thinking The Sympathizer, perhaps more than The Night Watchman, has maybe been read by more people already, and people might not want to reread. So totally open to whatever the group would like to decide on that one.
I'm really excited about that month. Whatever gets chosen, I'm really excited about it.
Yep.
And then October.
Yeah, we're doing 4 picks.
This is the one.
Chris is good. Do you want me to show you the cover again, Chris?
We are reading The Lions of Al Rasan by Guy Gabriel Kay for another go at fantasy. Look at that cover.
Chris is obsessed with the 90s covers. This is the original edition.
Just know that if I'm ever in Ontario again, Jessica, lock your doors.
Lock my doors.
I will burglarize. This is set. What era of Spain would you say this is inspired by?
This is the years? End of I think we're in roughly the 16th century. This is kind of the Spanish, the Catholic Spanish reconquest of Spain and the end of the Caliphate in Spain.
Okay. So I'm very excited about this. Jessica is a humongous Guy Gabriel Kay fan.
This will be my 3rd or 4th time reading this book.
Yeah, that cover is absolutely stunning. Come on, put that love for that cover in the chat.
Right? So we have to discuss. So I will say, look, my copy, it looks like it's 1,000 pages, but it's not. It is a longer book than we would typically pick. But Chris and I were thinking that we were going to read this in October, which tends to be a very reader-focused month. A lot of people tend to read a lot. And we were thinking of hosting a read-a-thon day.
We're trying to
with a live chat or something with everybody.
We're trying to finalize the plans on this because we wanted to make this one extra special, especially because so many people love GGK and Jessica's favorite. Would you say GGK is your favorite author?
Probably.
Yeah, you've read all of his books multiple times.
Yeah.
So
no pressure. But if you don't like this book, I'm kicking you out of the Discord. No, I'm joking. I go into this one with really high stakes. But we were talking. So the way this happened was Chris and I were talking about revisiting historical fiction and fantasy because both of our picks on the first go around were a little bit lackluster for us. And if you don't know, Guy Kay writes historical fantasy. So the fantasy elements in this are very sparse. This will read more like historical fiction. And what he does is takes a time and a place. He changes all of the names so that they're still recognizable. You will understand who the Christians are and who the Muslims and the Jews are. But you've gotta it is different. It is a fantasy setting.
Zan says that I'm in trouble. Good. I don't know if Zan doesn't like GGK.
I don't know. And I think too, we talked a lot about which of these to pick. This is a standalone.
Yeah, that's the other thing too, because like it's hard when you like want to like pick a fantasy novel, because a lot of the fantasy novels that appeal to me the most as a reader are in series. They're the big secondary world epic fantasy books, and it's hard to choose that as a book club pick because you know going into it that not all the narrative threads are going to be tied up and stuff like that. And I don't think it's super fair sometimes to like pick a book for a group of people that is the first book in a really long series. So that's one of the reasons GGK really stands out as a good choice, I think, for this, because it does provide, I think, that kind of like epic scope, but in a single volume.
The thing for me that he does the most successfully is provides character-driven, really intimate stories that are set against like an epic historical background, where you get that sense of scope, that epic quality of the story, but you're focused on really individual characters, and man, it's so good.
Zan, I'm the exact same.
Tagano is like don't let that one like ruin your life.
Yeah, I had very similar feelings about Tagano. I DNF Tagano. I love the writing though, which is why I'm excited to go into his books that have a different story, because I did really like the writing.
Yeah, Tagano's not my favorite.
We're not going to read The Eye of the World. No, I'm so sorry to disappoint.
Do you know how long it took me to get through Eye of the World, the first and only time I've read it, and I've never continued on with that? Like, it took me
a month.
And I don't know that months and months.
Wow.
Oh yeah, because I wasn't that engaged with it, and like, I don't know, man. Like, it was a lot. That book was a lot.
I like The Eye of the World. I like so like my Wheel of Time thoughts. I like The Eye of the World and The Great Hunt. Book 3 was difficult. 4 and 5 were an abomination, and I'm trying to get the motivation to read book 6.
Oh no, and then we're verging up on Sanderson.
What do you mean?
The later books, right? Like the series wraps up with Sanderson.
But you like Sanderson.
I do like Sanderson, but I know that you don't.
Boo.
Sanderson's so good. You know what I love about Sanderson that is like completely unrelated to anything is that the man writes books and puts them out at like a pace, like a consistent pace. There's always a new Sanderson coming, and it actually appears.
Yeah.
And the quality doesn't suffer. Fight me.
Okay, wait. You've read the first Mistborn trilogy.
I read the first Mistborn. I read Warbreaker.
Did you read the whole trilogy in Mistborn, or did you just read the first book?
I read all of them.
Okay.
Thank you, Zan.
Zan, we're gonna have words. But then, did you read? Did you read the Stormlight Archive?
Yeah. No, so I am gonna try to reread Way of Kings this year because I never finished it, and I own Words of Radiance. And I think at this point now, like somebody in one of my videos explained to me that the 10-book arc is being split into 2. So there's a 5-book arc and then a second 5-book arc. Because my problem with giant epic fantasy books that are like 1,200 pages long is that I don't want to be stuck waiting for releases. So I think at this point I'm okay to start Way of Kings and work my way through. And like by the time I get to book 5, it's probably going to have been published or is about to be published. So I think I'm going to be okay with that. Warbreaker was so good.
Yeah.
Oh, Chris, you're wrong.
I didn't read Warbreaker, so I can't talk. I read the first Mistborn book. I read Way of Kings.
Your most popular video ever.
Yeah, it is. It's most watched.
Yeah.
I've been ratioed though. Not really. Almost ratioed.
Really?
Oh yeah, it's real bad. I get a lot of hate on that video. I don't care. I said what I said. I stand by it.
That's fair, man. That's fair.
Then I read Words of Radiance.
Oh man, Zan just totally betrayed me. I have no good feelings towards him. Oh my god, I think I can agree with Heidi that like I like Sanderson but don't think he's amazing. I think I've had some moments with Sanderson, but over time I have like mellowed out to like I know I'm gonna like a Sanderson book, but he's no GGK for me.
Yeah, Zan, I was ready to say, I was like, I thought we've had conversations about Sanderson.
Oh man. This is why fantasy is so hard to pick, can I just say?
Yeah, it is hard to pick. Well, okay, there's like a huge like divide, I think, between like modern fantasy and like the writing style and plotting and like fantasy published in the years 2005 and previous. Yeah. And I tend to really I tend to really enjoy the books that are like 2005 and previous, and I actually struggle a lot more with like the modern writing style in fantasy and the modern like plotting and world building in fantasy.
Because I grew up on the older fantasy, right? Like I think I read Lord of the Rings is probably like, it might have been a Terry Brooks first, but then I read Lord of the Rings like when I was like 11. So I started with, he's one of those authors now that like I don't think is impressive in any way other than like he's stuck with a world for so many years. But he's like, I got into fantasy that way, and I read a ton of fantasy ahead of time. And then when Game of Thrones was released, I mean, I didn't read it right away. I probably read it in like 2000 or 2001, and I couldn't get through it the first time. Mm-hmm. And then I came back the second time. And once I finished book 1, talking about George R. R. Martin again, my mind was blown. And at that point, fantasy had changed for me because it wasn't like the questing fantasy. It wasn't about, and I think at the time too, like, let's not remember or not forget what it was like in like the year 2000 or 2005 before the bookish internet was like a thing, because the fantasy books that I knew about, that I had access to, that were like on the shelves at the library or on the shelves in the bookstore, were all a very specific type of fantasy. So, you know, like I read that same quest where nobody dies over and over and over. And then George R. R. Martin comes out and is like, well, maybe I'll kill some characters. And I was like, and from then on, I was like, you know, fantasy can be unpredictable and it can be completely different than I thought it was going to be.
See, I spoiled myself. My first adult fantasy was Game of Thrones. I read it when I was like 14 in 2009.
Oh my God, you're so young. Just a baby.
A wee little baby.
A wee little baby.
Yeah, but yeah, I agree. I mean, Game of Thrones obviously changed the game. Amy, by the way, deserves all the cookies for she has read Gardens of the Moon. I saw it on Instagram.
I saw it on Instagram this morning too. I was skimming through because I don't know if I'm going to read them, so I'm not reading your spoiler posts.
Well, he's a Canadian, Jessica. You should feel some sort of kinship here.
So's Margaret Atwood, and I'm like,
yeah, I need to read the Malazan. Andy's going to kill me if I don't read it. But yeah, it's just long, and I have so many series, and I just keep telling myself I'm going to read something easier. Zan, there's no way Sanderson take you real time. That is honestly my exact same opinion, Zan. Like, as much as I feel like Sanderson's not very good, he's got to do better than what's happening right now, Wheel of Time.
I've heard nothing real positive about books like 5 to 10 in Wheel of Time.
Oh, they're horrible.
And I think a lot of people like had that same or relief of just like the series is going to be finished. Like there is going to be an endpoint.
Yeah, every time I get to like the last like third of the book of one of those books, I'm just like, please, dear God, make my suffering end. Please make my suffering end.
So I will do anything. Tad Williams.
Oh, Rick! I'm telling Rick. I told Rick. I'm messaging him right after this.
I told Rick many times, and then I commented on his first video, and everybody got mad, and I was like, all right, I'm out. Like, I don't get it. I didn't read this when I was like a 14-year-old boy, and I don't get it, man. And I've heard from literally everybody that the books get better, but like,
I liked that book. We're talking about Dragon Bone Chair, by the way.
Yeah.
I liked the Dragon Bone Chair. I liked the writing style a lot. I found that main character to be excruciating. I want to throttle him.
I want to throw him off of Green Angel Tower.
Yeah.
Like just out the window, Lannister style.
I think what I found really difficult about him is that like he's 15 or 16 in a medieval world. He's like a kitchen scullion at the beginning. He is so whiny, and he's always like...
He's like a 9-year-old.
Yeah, but like, exactly. He's like 15, 16. And like he's given like the task of like sweeping the stairs once a day. Like it's literally like in terms of like medieval chores, he has it so easy. Yeah. And he just complains the whole time. And then he doesn't do it. Like he just doesn't sweep the stairs. Yeah. And then like the people that like he works for, like, you can't do one simple task. Why didn't you do this? And he's like, why am I so unfairly persecuted?
Why cry about it in the tower?
Yeah. And he says things like, why has God seen fit to punish me and stuff like that? And I'm like, you do less chores in the medieval times with no running water than I do in modern 21st century, and you have the audacity to complain when someone gets mad at you for not doing the chore.
He's the worst.
Oh, he's so annoying to me, and he's dumb. And I feel like like Fitz in the Robin Hood books can be like, he can be whiny, you know what I mean? Like he can complain, but at least Fitz has a difficult life.
And Fitz grows up fast.
Exactly. At least I can look at what happens to Fitz and be like, yeah, you're like a traumatized, abused child that you know is like with
daddy issues and a dead mom. Like
with Simon, like you're loved by everybody. You have this very supportive community, and you just don't do the work you're asked to do. And then you have the audacity to complain when people are mad at you for not doing the work that was asked of you.
He's so
holy crap! He annoyed the absolute.
Did you need to get that out, Chris?
I needed to. Well, I've been trying to read this. I've been trying to read the second book, and it's just it doesn't like. I have forgotten so many details of the first book, which means I have to go back. If I want to read the whole series, I have to like go back and reread that book, and I do want to because like Tad Williams' writing style is beautiful, but rough.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. Well. We really rambled.
Yeah.
Birch.
Oh yeah.
Birch would never
love it. No, right? He's got no patience for that.
Oh no, not at all. Birch would be cracking the whip. Anyway. Let's just end this thing. Next month we're reading North and South, Elizabeth Gateskill. I'll put the poll up for September.
I'll put the channels in, and we should update the schedule channel as well with all of these picks for people that weren't here for this, and so that we remember.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much for coming out, and this was a good conversation.
I agree.
And I'll end this now. I hope you guys have a great weekend, and for anybody that has a 3-day weekend this weekend, I hope you have lots of relaxing times and good reading. Bye.
Bye.